A while back, I got to interview a 4-time space shuttle astronaut, Tom Henricks, who was the pilot for 2 missions and the commander for 2 more missions. This is part 2 of the interview, and I just asked Tom what it's like to land the space shuttle and why it was flown by hand versus using an autopilot.
The shuttle was flown manually during all phases of that, during the test phase, and we did a couple of times on my missions, but we always flew the landing manually because of the lack of redundancy. We only had 2 radar altimeters, for example. There were multiple single point failures that could cause the computers to have a bad landing. And rather than have a pilot monitor for a failure and then take control, we determined it was safer just to let the pilot fly the landing and not have to worry about those failures that a computer couldn't handle. So for the shuttle, we would normally take manual control 4 minutes before landing. And that's at 40,000 feet, just as you go subsonic over the top of the runway. So to put in perspective how dynamic that is, if we put a skydiver out there, we would land before that person would hit the ground without opening their parachute. We're coming down to 10,000 feet of a minute.
So what on earth is it like landing the space shuttle? From a pilot's perspective, okay, I know how to land a Super Cub behind me. I know how to land a 182. Obviously, I don't know how to land a shuttle. So liken that to something. What is that like?
Okay, I love talking about the landing because that's what the pilots get to do. So it's a challenge in the shuttle because we've been in zero gravity for as long as 2 weeks. So what happens during that time is you stop using your legs and your feet, so your brain stops sensing your feet. Your inner ear follicles aren't being excited because of gravity, because there is no gravity. So your brain stops looking for that input as well. So what that means to a pilot is when you're landing back in gravity, your eyeballs will not slew with your skull. What that means, if you move your head and stop, your eyeball is actually jerking, and what you see is the runway moving. It doesn't stop. So we had to be disciplined about keeping our head fixed for the landing. That's one aspect.
And how do they train you for that? Because no simulator can accomplish that.
They don't. You have to prove it to yourself. When I landed after my first landing, I wanted to prove it, and I moved my head like that, and the cockpit spun. Wow. That's when I knew that they were telling me the truth.
They give you a warning about that, though,
yeah.
right?
And the other interesting aspect, back to your legs, so now we have to use the rudders and brake pedals as well to land a shuttle, so you don't want to have numb feet. So the technique there was to put the lap belt on after we did the deorbit burn. In other words, you know you're going to land. Strap yourself in and start pounding your feet. You've got your boots on. The boots feel like they weigh 20 pounds, but it's like your feet thawing out from being cold. It is actually painful. But if you don't do that, you won't have any sensation for the rudder pedals and brakes during landing.
No kidding.
2 unique things for landing.
And how does the shuttle handle in terms of just its flight characteristics?
Sure. It's again 737 size, 110-pound vehicle, but it has poor control harmony is the bottom line. So it's got great response and pitch, kind of sloppy response and roll. So it pitches like a fighter and rolls like a heavy airplane, which is fine until you get into a crosswind. And that's why we had very restrictive crosswind limits, 10 to 15 knots, depending on how long you'd been in space.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Mm-hmm. I imagine that's got to be a source of pride for you to know. I mean, not that you're better than any other astronaut, but I'm proud of you just to hear, hey, I manually flew the thing, for that portion of the mission. That's got to swell a lot of pride in you to know that you were able to do that.
Well, yes, thank you for opening the door to me.
You bet.
So
I'll pat your back. It's okay. You can pat along with me.
Well, I'm proud to say that I do have the 2 best shuttle landings, but I don't take full credit for it. I flew with the same co-pilot or pilot twice, and he had been one of my training pilots in the Gulfstream. So the teamwork that we used during training was exactly the same teamwork we used on the shuttle, and that's why I give credit for having 2 very successful landings.
Mm-hmm. And what does successful mean? Does it mean you greased the landing, or does it mean it just went off without a hitch, or you hit the target, or what does that mean in terms of successful?
So in the shuttle, everything is recorded. So about a month after you get back, you sit down with a room full of engineers, and they tell you and show you every movement you made in the flight control system. But the pilots were measured on touchdown point from the threshold, speed, and descent rate.
Okay.
And
you have the best.
I have the best.
That's great. That's awesome. Okay, so talking about kind of the reentry, one thing I've always been curious about is what the kind of communications blackout phase feels like. What does it look like? What's going through your head? And maybe, you could also kind of describe to our viewers what that is, why that happens, but I'd love to hear just emotionally what's going through your head when you know that you're not able to communicate back with mission control.
So the nice thing about the space shuttle was we didn't have much of blackout at all. It was very minimal because our antennas could broadcast through the top to a satellite. And we didn't have the extreme plume blocking that transmission, the plasma coming off of the vehicle. So our blackout periods were very short, and primarily due to bank angle changes, because we do change from one side to the other. But bottom line is blackout was insignificant.
Okay. So how long would that last for? When you say it was short?
Maybe 20, 30 seconds was all.
That still feels like a long time to me to know, hey, you're kind of on your own for half a minute or so.
Well, a lot of times there's nothing to say. If everything's going nominal, we're sitting back watching, monitoring, make sure everything's nominal, and if the ground's not talking, that might be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So for the SpaceX missions now that are longer, the blackout phase is longer than kind of the 30 seconds. I think the Apollo, at least based on my watchings of those, seemed longer than that. Do you think that was a similar reaction those astronauts had, that if everything's nominal, there's nothing really to worry about, the fact that we're kind of on our own right now?
Right. And when you're working in space, it's kind of nice not to have the ground calling you all the time.
That's good, yeah. Get
Although
a break.
You do have to rely on them. You got to imagine that, even on the space station now, 6 people working 24/7, different shifts, but there are about 300 people on the ground trying to help them get the job done. So it's a big team effort. You're just a pointy end of the spear if you're lucky enough to be the one in orbit.
So after the mission concludes, I'm curious to know, when's kind of the first moment that you can actually take a deep breath, relax, and think about something other than being in space? I mean, even as I watch the SpaceX missions, there's a lot of procedure and process and things that happen, as there should be afterwards. So I'm curious, kind of how long would it take for you to be able to take a breath and do the first kind of normal Earth thing? I got to take out the trash. And how do you even transition from that, knowing I just did a mission in space, and now my assignment now is take out the trash? When's that first moment, and what's that like?
Great question. So when you first get back, you're actually still working, because even the SpaceX NASA astronauts are going to be guinea pigs. They're going to be collecting medical data that they can make a large database out of. So you're working the day you get back. Then they typically spend one night at the landing site, Kennedy Space Center, and then return to Houston. And then you're doing public relations immediately as soon as you land. And then you get back into the office the next day, and you're going through more medical, more technical debrief. So there really isn't a break for about the first month, typically. You're really busy. But that doesn't mean that the second day you're home, your wife isn't going, which bill do I pay here? So it was a common thing where within, say, 5 to 6 days from getting back into space, you or getting back to Earth from space, you would have to pinch yourself going, did I really go? Because my life back here is the same. I'm coming to the office every day. I go home, and there's something wrong with the kids. I got to fix the toilet, or the car's broken down. It didn't really change our day-to-day lives that much, even though it was a fantastic experience. Your family didn't go with you. They're still the same. Your home's the same.
Mm-hmm. And did you have any rituals after coming home that you'd kind of do with your family, or ways to kind of pinch yourself that, hey, I'm back on Earth, and here's something I like to do to celebrate that?
No, we didn't have a common one. So, no, it was just celebrate and enjoy the time together, share the experience a bit. Of course, the kids were pretty young when I was flying, and their friends, many of them were also children of astronauts, and it was no big deal. Oh, yeah, I went to space? Okay, what's on TV? Because my dad's going in 2 months, or my mom just got back a year ago, and it was normal. During show and tell or bring your dad to work day, They didn't want to see an astronaut at Ed White Elementary School. They wanted to see a fireman.
Okay. Well, and what was your kind of wife's demeanor when you were in space? I mean, did that change across your missions, or was she kind of thinking, hey, he's on mission and no big deal? Or what was that like, kind of managing your kind of personal home front while you were away?
So the wives, they had jobs, and my wife worked while I was in space to try and keep routine. And if you had young kids at home, of course, you did the normal routine to keep life normal for them. But NASA was sensitive to that, so we would get a call to our families once a week with essentially what's now called Zoom. I mean, we would have a private conversation on the laptop, and the only person that could eavesdrop on that was the flight surgeon, trying to detect if there are any issues with the crew person and make sure the family wasn't overburdening the crew member. But it was a great time, so the kids could actually see that their parent was a normal person in space. And you got to share the moment and catch up on their lives for just a couple minutes. And then we also made calls via ham radio, if that was on board. So they tried to make it normal. We could do emails every day.
And were you trying to kind of take a mental focus of, I'm on mission, it's got to probably be hard not to think about your home front, your loved ones, and think about what's going on? Or what was kind of that mental focus like for you? Was that challenging, and did it come naturally?
No, for me, I was more in the cockpit than I was worried about the family, because I trusted my wife. She's taking care of that. That's her job. My job was taking care of the vehicle and the crew in space. And it was just a nice sidelight to get the chance to talk to the family, but then you go right back to work.
Yeah, you're at work. Yeah, makes sense. Last question about you in space. Describe weightlessness to us. Is that pretty fun? Is it weird? Did you get nauseous? What was weightlessness like?
So I did not ever get nauseous on any of the missions, partly because the pilots have to stay strapped in right after we get to zero gravity. So we stay in those seats for about 2 hours reconfiguring the systems, and everybody else has to get up, stow their seats, get out of their suits. So they're thrashing about, and it's very disorienting because there's no up and down. And in fact, that was my counsel to my teammates, my crewmates, was don't establish up and down. You got to give up on it because there's too many conflicting inputs. The other technique I used was to stay busy. Keep the crew busy so you don't think about getting ill. Just like in the airplane, if somebody's feeling ill, distract them, get them some cool air, and hopefully, and of course we had medication on board to try and prevent it. But again, we would have a few vomit every day. But living and working in zero gravity takes a bit of time to get used to because it's physically effortless. We don't use our legs. In fact, we didn't wear shoes because shoes became a hazard because you could inadvertently flip a switch not knowing that you'd done it. So no shoes unless you're exercising. You touch the wall, you float to the other wall. One of the challenges that I had was I'm one of those people that hammers a keyboard. Bad technique in zero gravity, because you have to hold yourself down by tucking your toes in a cloth loop to hold yourself down. Otherwise, you keep pushing yourself away from the keyboard. Well, the second day I was in space, I got cramps in my legs from fighting my keyboard inputs. So I had to learn to chill on the keyboard.
Well, that doesn't seem like something anyone can warn you about until you go do it and you realize you banged the keyboard, right?
Right.
I lied. One more question. So are there any other kind of common teaching points you give your crew members as the commander or people's first time in space? Those seems like very practical points, but what other advice were you giving your crew before going?
So one of the simple ones was I would say eat breakfast. There were folks that were so afraid of vomiting when they got to space that they wouldn't eat breakfast. Well, breakfast was served almost 6 hours before we ever got to zero G. So I said, number one, it's going to be digested anyway. Number two, if you are going to get sick, you might as well have something to show for it. So enjoy your breakfast. And the real reason was, if we ended up in a survival situation, the last thing you wanted to do would be dehydrated and malnourished to start with.
Interesting. I'm kind of hearing this common theme about either problems you experienced in space, advice you gave your crew members. Not to downplay, but it sounds like normal life happening. It's normal life challenges you have, obviously on a much more sophisticated scale, but you're dealing with normal problems up there. And I think sometimes that might get lost to the rest of us down here. That's like, hey, they're human, right? They're dealing with human things up there.
No,
So
we
it's
do.
interesting to hear you say that.
So when I speak to business groups, one of the things they'll ask about is the team play. Now, how did that all work out? And I say, okay, imagine taking your team, say you have 5 direct reports. We're going to put you and your 5 direct reports in a normal size office. We'll put a porta potty in there, all the food you need, all the water you're going to need. We're going to work you 14 hours a day. Every other day, we're going to put you on national TV. We're going to give you 3 hours of sleep a night, and you'll see some personality changes and team dynamics.
So you've accomplished so much in space. You were also an aviator before going to space, and you're an aviator now. You're an active pilot, and so you've flown the biggest and best there is, from the space shuttle to F-16s to F-4s. So what has your aviation interest now?
Well, I have to add the A380 to that. I've got 3 landings in the A380. It was the highlight of a decade after I left NASA. Was a friend of mine was a test pilot at Airbus, and that was a great experience. Fly-by-wire reminded me a lot of the shuttle, not the same experience, but similar. Now I'm looking for a 182. I fly a Stearman, and flying is still a passion for me. When I was in business, I would still go out and rent airplanes. Even when I was working in Manhattan, I'd go out to White Plains and rent a plane, and people would ask me, "You're such a busy executive, why do you go flying?" When I fly, that's all I think about. I just focus on that, don't worry about another thing, so it's actually relaxing to go fly. I still have a passion for it, enjoy it, it's part of my life.
Are there things you're still wanting to accomplish from an aviation perspective or kind of personal bucket list? I mean, it seems like when you've flown into the heavens, what is there left to do? But what are some other things that you're still looking forward to doing and taking part in?
I want to take my grandchildren flying. Haven't had the chance to do that. I've taken all my children flying, but now they've got kids. So that's my bucket list, is get my grandchildren interested in aviation space. And the oldest one's only 12 now, so there's some time to go. The other is I'm working on starting up a business airline on the West Coast. That's a new challenge for me, and it's exciting because the industry is changing. We're going to see a change in private flying and a change in public flying, and it's going to be, in my opinion, dramatic. The two will diverge because of this pandemic.
Well, and kind of related to that, what are you kind of hoping for the space program in the future? And you were obviously an integral part of that, flying 4 missions. You accomplished a lot of things, why the shuttle was launched in the first place, but also the experiments that were done on you and your crew members. I mean, you are a very important role in kind of the spectrum of what space travel has become and where it's going. So what's kind of your perspective on what you're kind of hoping for the future of space and kind of looking forward to watching happen in your lifetime?
Well, I think you're seeing it right now with the SpaceX and shortly the Boeing Dreamliner or Starliner will fly, and it is opening up the opportunity for almost everyone to go into space. You won't have to be, as I said before, a test pilot. You won't have to be a government employee. You won't even have to be rich. The price is going to drop. The diversity of needs in space is already expanding. Remember, it initially started out test pilots and researchers to go to the moon. Well, then we needed medical doctors and chemists and physicists to do the experiment in space. Now we have a space station that's been up for over 2 decades. You need people that can maintain that. As we go further out into space, back to the moon, onto Mars, we're going to need plumbers, construction people, a diverse group of needs, artists. So I think it's great. Just as aviation expanded during the first half of the 19th century, travel in space is going to expand the first half of this century.
Oh, I can't wait to watch that unfold. That's very much on my bucket list, to go to space. So see if that gets to happen one day.
Do it.
So you've flown the A380, you've flown the shuttle, you've flown 182s, you've flown Stearman, you've flown all kinds of stuff. So looking back on all of that, what's your favorite aircraft or spacecraft to have flown?
The one I'm flying at the time. I love them all because they're all different. I love the F-16, but thought the F-15 was a much easier airplane to fly. They had different missions. That's why they flew differently. The Stearman, I love the feel of the air. It reminds me of skydiving because you feel every verbal, you feel every touch of the runway. I love the 182 because you can take people with you and share the experience and actually go somewhere. I haven't found an airplane I don't like.
You're one of the very few astronauts in the world. What do you tell people now that are looking to either have a career in space or related to the space program? It's a very small group. It's a very elite group. What do you tell people that are looking to get into something like that?
So related to another answer, the needs in space for human skills and knowledge is going to continue to expand. So young people need to identify what they have a passion for and pursue that. And that could be engineering, medical doctor, artist, whatever it is, even a trade, the plumber, the electrician. Find what you're passionate about, pursue that, because that enables you to be the best at that. And then when that skill or knowledge is needed in space, you'll be a likely candidate.
Interesting. Well, maybe they'll need a YouTube channel in space. We'll see. Get there. So, Tom, you're kind of a personal hero for me in a way, in that you have flown to space. You're an active aviator. You're an accomplished businessman, and those are things that I love and get to enjoy. And so, to get to hear you talk about those things is very enriching for me and things I care about. I'd be curious from you as the astronaut. What are things you have been to space? You've done all these things. What are things here on Earth that you really care about and you want people to kind of be aware about as well?
Great question. So I want everyone to reach their full potential. And too often, young people will limit their future options by what they choose to study in school. So I absolutely believe that young people need to take STEM courses, science, technology, engineering, math, and the arts as well. But they need to get a broad background at an early age. I'm talking 6th to 8th grade is about the age group that are making decisions that will change their lives or limit their options. So they need to continue to take those math and engineering classes or science classes into high school so that they can have that option if they choose to in the future. So I support one of the local charities here is the Science Mill in Johnson City. It targets rural, disadvantaged students to get them involved in STEM in a hands-on way. There are thousands of opportunities around the globe to help young people get interested in those things that will give them opportunities as adults.
And where can people learn more about the Science Mill?
Online. Just Google the Science Mill and contact me through Airplane Academy.
Okay, there we go. Most important is we got to talk about your sock game here. Tell us about your socks.
So we've got the shuttle here. We've got the early Russian space station here. Oh, there's the orbiter. Another shot of the orbiter. Looks like the Ariane there. So just a spectrum of space.
Where do we get those?
From your grandkids at Christmas.
In case you missed it, in part 1 of the interview, Tom describes what it's like to launch and fly the space shuttle and what it's like operating in space. So that video is on the screen right now and you don't want to miss it. So I'll see you there.